The mind moves ceaselessly, darting from one thought to another like a monkey leaping through trees. It constantly seeks stimulation, rarely finding contentment in the present moment. One moment it's replaying a memory, the next it's projecting a future scenario, often with no rhyme or reason. This restlessness is both its nature and its dilemma. It craves novelty, driven by an innate tendency to avoid stillness, as if silence were a threat to its existence. Even when there's nothing pressing to ponder, it invents concerns, conjures up worries, or revisits old regrets. It's perpetually seeking something, answers, distractions, solutions, but never lingers long enough to truly grasp what it's chasing. In its restlessness, the mind often misses the richness of the moment. Like a butterfly flitting from flower to flower without stopping to savor the nectar, it moves too quickly to notice what's right in front of it. And yet, for all its activity, it accomplishes little when left unchecked, spinning its wheels in an endless loop of thoughts. This ceaseless mental motion is both a survival mechanism and a source of suffering. It has evolved to keep us alert, scanning for threats and opportunities, but in a world of constant stimuli, it has become overactive. Rather than serving us, it often keeps us trapped, unable to find the stillness and clarity that lie beneath its endless chatter. The mind has an extraordinary talent for creating the illusion that it is in control, that it is the grand orchestrator of our lives. It narrates our experiences, constantly labeling, judging, and interpreting everything we encounter. It whispers or sometimes shouts that it is the one making decisions, steering the course and ensuring everything happens just as it should. And yet, when we pause to observe, we begin to see that much of what the mind claims as it's doing simply unfolds on its own. Consider the thoughts that arise in your head. Do you summon them deliberately, or do they simply appear unbidden, like clouds drifting into the sky? And the decisions you make, are they really the result of careful deliberation? Or do they often seem to emerge from a deeper place, one you can't quite explain? The mind takes credit for these processes, but much of it happens beyond conscious control. This illusion of control extends to how we perceive our lives. The mind loves to construct narratives about how things should be. It clings to plans and expectations, believing that if it just works hard enough, it can bend reality to its will. But life has a way of reminding us that it is far larger and more intricate than the mind can comprehend. Events unfold with a rhythm of their own, often disrupting our carefully laid schemes. And yet the mind resists this truth. It clings to the belief that it must control everything, fearing that letting go would result in chaos. But in trying to control, it creates tension, anxiety, and frustration. The irony is that true peace and clarity often come not from grasping but from releasing, from recognizing that the mind is not the master but a participant in the flow of life. This isn't to diminish the mind's role. It's a marvelous tool, capable of incredible creativity and problem-solving. But its tendency to overreach, to assume the role of ruler rather than servant, is what leads us into the trap of believing we're in charge when we're simply part of the unfolding dance. The illusion of control is a comforting story, but like all stories, it's just that a story. Thoughts are like ripples on the surface of a pond, arising effortlessly and fading just as naturally. They appear seemingly out of nowhere, without any conscious effort on our part. You don't sit and decide, now I'll think about an old memory, or now I'll imagine a conversation. These things simply happen, springing up from the depths of the mind like bubbles rising to the surface of water. If you pay close attention, you'll notice how thoughts flow in a stream, one leading to the next, often without logic or invitation. A word you hear might trigger a memory, which then spirals into a chain of associations, pulling you from one idea to another without your explicit consent. And yet, we often identify so strongly with these thoughts, believing they define who we are, when in reality they're more like passing weather. This spontaneous nature of thought reveals something profound. The mind operates largely on its own. It's like a musician improvising a melody, beautiful, chaotic, and unpredictable. But unlike the musician who plays with intention, the mind doesn't ask for your permission. It churns away, conjuring up images, replaying events, or crafting fantasies, all without you needing to lift a finger. There's a certain beauty in this natural process, but also a potential trap. Because thoughts arise so seamlessly, it's easy to get caught up in them, to believe they are you, or that you must act on everything they suggest. Yet, just as a river carries fallen leaves downstream without clinging to them, so too can you learn to watch thoughts come and go without attachment. This recognition that thoughts are not under your control can be both liberating and humbling. It shows that much of what happens in the mind is simply a part of the natural unfolding of life. Rather than a problem to be solved, the arising of thoughts is an intricate dance, one that reflects the deeper rhythms of existence. The key is not to stop the flow, but to watch it with curiosity, understanding that you are the awareness in which these thoughts arise and dissolve. There is a subtle yet profound difference between who you are and the thoughts that arise in your mind. For much of life, this distinction remains hidden, as we instinctively identify with the stream of thoughts running through our heads. When a thought says, "I am angry" or "I am worried," it feels as though it is not just a passing mental event, but a statement about your very being. And yet, if you pause for a moment, you might notice something remarkable. There is a part of you that is aware of the thought, observing it as it arises and fades. This observing presence is constant, while thoughts come and go. Consider it for a moment. You might have thousands of thoughts in a single day, each one vying for your attention, each one carrying its own story. But if you were truly your thoughts, then who is the one noticing them? Thoughts are like clouds drifting across the sky. They can be heavy and dark or light and wispy, but they are not the sky itself. You are the vast open awareness in which these clouds appear. This distinction becomes clearer when you reflect on how transient thoughts really are. One moment you might be preoccupied with a problem, utterly consumed by it, and the next moment it's gone, replaced by a thought about what to eat for dinner. If your identity were tied to these fleeting impressions, you would be in a constant state of flux. Instead, there is a deeper self, a still and unchanging core that remains regardless of what the mind conjures. Recognizing this separation is not about rejecting thoughts or pushing them away. Thoughts are natural and have their purpose. They help us plan, analyze, and make sense of the world. But they are tools, not masters. The trouble begins when we mistake them for the totality of who we are. When we take every thought at face value, believing its narrative without question, we become entangled, forgetting the vastness of the awareness that holds it all. Understanding this distinction opens the door to freedom. You begin to see that you don't have to believe every thought that crosses your mind. You don't have to be swept away by every mental storm. Instead, you can watch the thoughts with curiosity, knowing they are not the essence of you. They are simply movements in the field of consciousness, appearing and disappearing while you, the witness, remain untouched and whole. The mind is one of the most extraordinary tools at our disposal, a marvel of evolution that has given humanity the ability to solve complex problems, create art, invent technologies, and build civilizations. Its capacity for logic, imagination, and analysis is unparalleled, allowing us to navigate the world with precision and ingenuity. It's the mind that constructs languages, devises systems of thought, and envisions futures that do not yet exist. In this way, the mind is a master craftsman, capable of shaping reality itself through its creations. But like any tool, the mind is most effective when used appropriately. A hammer is perfect for driving nails but useless for cutting wood. Similarly, the mind excels in tasks that require structure, calculation, and planning, but it falters when applied to things that demand presence, intuition, or surrender. The problem arises when the mind forgets its role as a tool and begins to act as the master, dictating every moment of our lives as though it alone knows what is best. When allowed to dominate, the mind creates endless chatter, spinning stories about what has happened, what might happen, or what should happen. It becomes preoccupied with controlling outcomes, replaying past mistakes, or fantasizing about futures that may never come to pass. Rather than serving us, it takes over, turning the vibrant, flowing experience of life into a maze of overthinking and self-doubt. What's more, the mind often imposes a sense of separateness, dividing the world into categories, labels, and judgments. It draws sharp boundaries between me and you, right and wrong, success and failure. These distinctions can be useful in certain contexts, but when rigidly adhered to, they obscure the interconnected nature of reality, creating a sense of isolation and struggle. Recognizing the mind as a tool means understanding its limitations as well as its strengths. It is brilliant for constructing ideas and solving problems, but it cannot grasp the fullness of life, which is far too vast and subtle to be contained by thoughts alone. The richest experiences, love, beauty, awe, and stillness, cannot be dissected or analyzed. They must simply be felt, lived, and embraced. To use the mind effectively, one must learn to set it down when it's not needed, much like a craftsman lays down their tools after completing a task. This doesn't mean rejecting the mind or silencing it forcefully, but rather cultivating the awareness that you are more than your thoughts. When the mind is quiet, its true power becomes evident, not as a master to obey, but as a servant that works in harmony with the deeper intelligence of life itself. The mind loves to categorize, to label, to divide the world into neat and tidy boxes. It builds walls of distinction, drawing lines between what is me and what is me and what is not me, between what is good and what is bad, what is right, and what is wrong. These divisions seem to be fundamental to how we navigate life, giving us a sense of order and control. But when you step back and look more closely, you begin to see that these boundaries are not as solid as they appear they are, in fact, illusions. Take, for instance, the notion of the self. The mind creates an image of who you are, your name, your history, your personality, your preferences, your desires. It builds an identity, something to hold on to in a world of change. But if you closely examine this sense of self, you'll find it to be just a collection of thoughts, memories, and experiences, all stitched together into a coherent narrative. This self is fluid, shifting, changing with each new experience. And yet we often cling to it as though it was something fixed, something permanent. This illusion of separation also extends to the world around us. The mind constantly labels things as other, constructing distinctions between what belongs to me and what belongs to you, between the self and the external world. But if you look deeper, you realize that these boundaries are not inherent in the world itself. The world is a vast, interconnected web, and the separation we perceive is simply a byproduct of how our minds process and interpret reality. Just as a wave on the ocean might seem separate from the water around it, yet is made of the very same substance, so too are we inseparable from the universe we inhabit. This is evident in nature. A tree grows from the earth, its roots reaching deep into the soil, its branches reaching toward the sky. The tree is not separate from the soil or the air, it is part of a greater system. Likewise, every living being is interconnected, influenced by forces far beyond what the mind perceives. The boundaries we create between ourselves and the rest of the world are convenient and useful for organizing experience, but they don't reflect the true nature of things. These illusory boundaries create a sense of isolation and separation, leading us to experience life as a series of conflicts, us versus them, right versus wrong, mine versus yours. This sense of division underlies much of the suffering in the world, from personal struggles to global conflicts. When we believe that we are separate, we feel threatened by others, by change, by the unknown. We fight to protect what we perceive as ours, whether it's our body, our possessions, or our beliefs. But the more we hold on to these boundaries, the more we miss the underlying unity that connects all things. By questioning these divisions, we open ourselves to a deeper understanding. When we stop seeing ourselves as separate entities, when we recognize that the walls we've built between me and you here and there are just mental constructs, we can begin to experience life in a more fluid, open, and harmonious way. In this space, we begin to see that we are not isolated, but part of an intricate, ever-changing whole and interconnected dance of energy, thought, and form. The illusion of separation dissolves, revealing the unity that underlies all of existence. Acceptance, rather than rejection, is the key to a life of peace and clarity. The mind, by its nature, resists what it doesn't understand or what it perceives as threatening. It tends to push away anything that feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or undesirable. Whether it's a challenging emotion, a difficult situation, or an unexpected twist in the story of our lives, the instinctive reaction is often one of resistance. We try to change things, control them, or even escape from them, believing that by rejecting what's uncomfortable, we'll somehow find relief. But this resistance only creates more tension, more struggle, and more suffering. When we reject what arises in our experience, we create a conflict between what is and what we wish should be. And in that conflict, we lose sight of the present moment, the only place where life actually happens. Rejection comes from a place of fear, the fear of not being in control, the fear of feeling helpless, or the fear that something painful will overwhelm us. But by rejecting what we fear, we give it power over us. It becomes the very thing we cannot escape from because we are forever engaged in a battle with it. Acceptance, on the other hand, does not mean giving up or resigning ourselves to things as they are. It does not mean we condone everything that happens, or that we should remain passive in the face of hardship. Acceptance is about recognizing the present moment as it is, without trying to force it to be different. It's about letting go of the struggle, even when things are difficult, and allowing life to unfold without constant interference. When we truly accept what arises, we allow ourselves to meet life as it is, without judgment, without the need to label it as good or bad. This doesn't mean we stop acting or making choices, but it frees us from the burden of trying to control every detail. It allows us to move through life with more fluidity, with a sense of ease, knowing that we are not in opposition to the forces around us. We become participants in the flow of life, rather than opponents in an endless struggle. In this space of acceptance, we also cultivate compassion, not only for others but for ourselves. We stop judging ourselves for our perceived weaknesses, mistakes, or flaws. We stop rejecting parts of ourselves that we find uncomfortable or difficult, and instead we learn to embrace them with kindness. This acceptance does not mean complacency, rather, it's an act of deep self-awareness and self-love, recognizing that we are whole, even with our imperfections. The paradox of acceptance is that, when we stop fighting against life, we open up to the fullness of it. In letting go of our resistance, we often find that what we feared or rejected becomes easier to handle, or even fades away. When we stop clinging to our idealized versions of how things should be, we allow space for things to unfold in their own time, without the pressure of our expectations. And in this spaciousness there is freedom. Freedom from the need to control, to judge, or to resist. It is the freedom to simply be, to experience life as it comes, and to move with it rather than against it. Observing without attachment is a subtle and powerful practice that can transform the way we experience the world. The mind is naturally drawn to grasp onto things, to make judgments, to cling to thoughts, emotions, and experiences as if they were permanent fixtures. We tend to identify with what we experience, believing that our emotions, thoughts, or circumstances define us. But in reality, all of these are fleeting. They come and go like waves in the ocean, temporary and ever-changing. To observe without attachment is to step back from this natural tendency to hold on. It's to witness the thoughts that arise in the mind without becoming entangled in them. To notice emotions without identifying them as who you are. For example, when anger arises, instead of becoming consumed by it or acting impulsively in response, you simply notice it. You observe the physical sensations in the body, the racing thoughts, the tension in the chest, without judging it or trying to get rid of it. You recognize that it is just a passing experience, not a permanent part of your identity. This shift in perspective allows you to engage with life more fully and clearly. Rather than being swept away by every thought, feeling, or event, you can hold them lightly, like leaves floating on a stream. You are aware of them, but you do not let them dictate your actions or sense of self. This doesn't mean you become detached or disengaged from life. On the contrary, you become more attuned to the present moment, free from the clutter of unnecessary attachments and reactions. The key to this form of observation is non-judgment. When we attach judgment to what we experience, we create a barrier between ourselves and the world around us. We label things as good or bad, desirable or undesirable, and that judgment leads to attachment. The desire to cling to what is pleasurable or familiar, and the desire to avoid what is uncomfortable or unknown, creates an inner tension that keeps us from truly seeing things as they are. To observe without attachment is to see clearly, without the distortions of personal preference or fear. It is to watch the passing of thoughts, emotions, and experiences with curiosity, as if they were clouds passing through the sky. In this space, there is no urgency to control or change what is happening. Instead, there is a deep sense of peace, knowing that everything is temporary, that nothing lasts forever. The joy or sorrow you feel today will shift, just as the thoughts that arise in your mind will eventually fade away. This practice also brings a deep sense of freedom. When you stop attaching to your thoughts and emotions, you are no longer at their mercy. You are not defined by them, and you do not need to act on every impulse or reaction. You have the ability to respond to life with clarity and intention rather than reacting impulsively out of attachment. The more you practice observing without attachment, the more you begin to experience life from a place of spaciousness and ease. You find that you can be present with whatever arises without being swept away by it. In this space of observation, you discover a deeper connection with yourself and the world around you, one that is free from the chains of attachment and rooted in the quiet awareness of what is. In the end, the mind is both a wondrous tool and a source of confusion, constantly shifting between restlessness, illusions of control, and attachments to thoughts and experiences. Yet by recognizing that thoughts arise naturally and observing them without attachment, we can free ourselves from the constant struggle and tension they create. We realize that the boundaries we construct between self and other, between good and bad, are mere mental constructs, and that true peace comes from accepting life as it unfolds, rather than resisting it. When we understand that we are not our thoughts, that we are the awareness that observes them, we find ourselves in a position of greater freedom. The mind, in its appropriate role as a tool, can serve us rather than dominate us. And by embracing life with acceptance, without attachment to outcomes or judgments, we allow ourselves to move with the flow of existence, rather than against it, finding harmony in the space between what is and what we think should be. In this space of awareness, we can experience life fully without being consumed by it. We become participants in the dance of life, not victims of it, and in that participation we find a deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the world around us. The key is not in controlling the mind, but in observing it with clarity, letting go of the illusions of separation, and embracing the natural flow of things with open hands. Only then can we truly live in peace, rooted in the ever-present awareness that transcends the fleeting nature of thought and experience.